Hello, welcome everybody to this doctoral defense. I am Professor Mark Lehmann. I am chair of this jury, doctoral jury, and today we have the defense of Hasan Işıklı. And by this I open the meeting formally. After the first meeting in the presence of the doctoral student and after further deliberation about the merit of the dissertation entitled Awareness of the Place, an ethnographic research into Izmir as a place of urban memory in the context of the International Izmir Festival, that's the title, which was submitted by Hasan Işıklı to obtain the degree of Doctor of Art Science. The doctoral examination board has decided that Hasan Işıklı has been admitted to the public defense of the dissertation. Today we have this public defense. And so I give the word to Hasan to give a short presentation about the objective and the findings of your research, and you have 20 minutes at your disposal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Lehmann. So I will share the screen. Voila. So Honorable Chair of the Exam Committee, esteemed members of the jury, dear colleagues, dear friends and family, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hasan Işıklı, and I'm honored to be able to present my research to you today in the public defense. Before I start the presentation, I would like to thank all my family members, especially my aunt and my mother, supporting me during the research and writing editing process. I also thank the jury members giving their time and attention to the evaluation of my thesis. Finally, I greet all my friends, colleagues, and relatives being present today. I also thank to Peter De Smet for his technical support. So, yeah. So, the structure of my presentation is as follows. After having introduced my research question, I will first explain the evolution of my research, why I shifted from city branding research with a graphic designer initiative to memory studies. Then I will try to explain as clear as possible my theoretical framework and research methods in relation to my research objects. The International Izmir Festival takes place in some particular memory places in the city of Izmir. I will present the results of my case studies, and then I will present my conclusion. So why jumping from graphic design to memory studies? My research focuses on the International Izmir Festival and the historical sites that it includes in its program, and hence presents them to local and international audiences. My hypothesis is that when the prestigious classical music, theater, and dance performances are organized in these sites, the spectators and the media can rediscover and experience them in a more conscious way. Different than antique sites like Ephesus and Asklepion, the festival participants get to know places like Kadife, Ayavukula, Regi, and Abacıoğlu Han through the festival. The places touch upon the recent past of the city of Izmir, but they have been largely neglected till the intervention of the festival. My research questions were, does the festival participant become aware of this disconnection between history, place, and memory through the festival in these particular places? Does the Izmir Festival provide a critical counterweight to the nostalgic discourse of revalorization that considers these historic sites as cultural heritage, befitting the smooth representation of a homogeneous city identity? So here you see the new icon of Izmir. During my research, I realized that city branding creates a smooth image of the city, excluding contradictory narratives. In my case, Izmir is promoted to be a city that is 8,000 years. Parallel to the global developments of city branding in tourism, many local organizations are seeking to give the city of Izmir international name and fame. Its historical background and geography are part of this image-making process. Especially the historical sites are revalued as powerful symbols of the city. Here, for example, you see the 3D implementation of the Izmir logo designed by I Mean It advertisement company with the initiatives of Izmir Development Agency. The evil eye symbolizes the Turkish identity and the script wavy character symbolizes the sun, the sea, and holidays. The city branding was focusing on the evil eye, which was not representing a local value, but rather a national one, and the typography was giving reference to summer resort towns. However, Izmir is also the city of trade, agriculture, industry, and education. The richness of the city was coming from the know-how of the non-Muslim communities in the earlier centuries, but its background of the city was not reflected in the image making. Before I started this research, I was heading into the same direction of that of the advertisement agency. But one day, something extraordinary happened. I learned from the news that the International Izmir Festival organized a concert in Ayvukla at Basmane. I mean, locals know, but I will explain. The district is in the old part of Izmir, and it's inhabited by people whose income is low. And it's famous for its nightlife and prostitution. So imagine there is Orthodox church in that setting. Also, there is a festival going on. It was quite unusual and attractive for me. So the festival's effect on me as a spectator, next to the quality of its artistic program, was an urban one. It made visible a part of Izmir that I did not know before. It made visible the yet invisible. From that moment onwards, I was intrigued by concepts like memory place, urban palimpsests, and heterotopia. For me, the festival activated heterotopia, where I encountered another space, a space that was out of joint with my contemporary life. I was surrounded by a historical building, a historical neighborhood, and I could sense the complex layers of the city that were removed from city branding image. To investigate the research questions that I mentioned before, I adopted the research method of ethnography, which was really challenging, which took 10 years. The research method of ethnography does not study the village, I mean, like architects or urban planning, or we do in graphic design, but much more about how humans perceive, how they make sense of the city. So why ethnography? Why not some visual analysis or historical literature review that I could do? Because I need to be there to observe the impact of the festival among the participants, to give voice to the diversity in the festival as an event, spectator, organizer, old and young, upper and middle class. And I want to listen to their stories, their discourse, their narrations, which elements would come out if I listen to them instead of formulating my own theories, which heterotopian spaces to erupt during the festival. I made both in the interviews, if you remember, the participants are there, and then participant observation based on my volunteer job and in the festival. I kept a fieldwork diary to keep track of my observations and experiences. The research process consists first of the selection of urban memory places that the festival made visible. Next to Ayvukla, I detected 3 other historical places, Kadife Kale, Reji, and Abacıoğlu Inn. I applied snowball sampling technique, sustaining on my insiderness. I utilized my volunteer job in the festival for the organizers, my friend circle, and my aunt's network to have access to the spectators. In this graphic, you see how my snowball sampling grew consistently. I conducted semi-structured interviews with sound recorder, and I use color tablets as an icebreaker. And gradually, I let the questions go with the flow of daily life conversations. As I said, I also meticulously and consistently took field notes. So let me now move to the short description of my research object, the International Izmir Festival. It's an arts festival composing a program of Western classical music, world music, contemporary dance, ballet, and theater. Art meets the history is its slogan. Its aims presenting the historical buildings to locals and international visitors. It has high quality art performances. It has the image of Izmir to have a prestigious, and it has a diverse program. It is an organization of İKSEV supported by Eczacıbaşı Holding. It is also affiliated with the Izmir Metropolitan Municipality, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and the Izmir Development Agency. It also belongs to an international network of European Festivals Association. Here you see a concert during Izmir International Festival happening in the Efes Amphitheater. My research group were the festival participants, not the people in the neighborhood. They are highly educated and belong to middle and upper classes. There were 20 plus volunteers and students between 30 and 50 ages and 60 plus age groups, I mean the retired ones. Although I aimed at the beginning to interview the local administration and the artists, I evaluated them for practical reasons. I know that our spectators from Izmir know well their city and they have enough knowledge about the International Izmir Festival, but I will describe the city briefly for the international audience. So here you see the map of Izmir, especially from the seaside. It is located at the western coast of Turkey, precisely at the Aegean Sea, at Eastern Mediterranean Sea. It is the third most populated Turkish city. And here you see the internal part of the bay, that you see the metropolitan zone is surrounding the bay. In order to understand the heterotopian spaces that erupt in these historical sites where the festival takes place, I conducted a historical study first to trace the relevant text ruptures in the recent history of the city of Izmir, the big fire of Smyrna in 1922. Second, I studied the social rupture. There has been the erasure of departure of communities within the urban memory. Also their knowledge and trade network. There has been what Bourdieu would call an erosion of cultural capital. The third rupture is urban development of the city in the context of Turkish modernity. For example, here, I mean, the locals will remember there is this Bar Street, which used to be pre-modern residential neighborhoods that changed the function through the modernity. In the setting of Izmir, the harbor and the developing industry received the migration waves, resulting with the handover of the urban realm. The city fell from 50s into a populist policy for estate and construction. It means shanty houses surrounding Kadefekale and other hills, overwhelming way, and destruction of old houses, including the old suburbs Karşıyaka, Göztepe, Buca, and Bornova, and building cheap apartment blocks. So considering the settings, what happens when the festival visits these ruptured places in the context of pioneer role of city branding and tourism, presenting local values, cultural heritage, and having Western originated performing arts? My first case study is Kadefekale. You see here an old picture of the castle and its neighborhoods. It was known as Old Muslim Neighborhood, disadvantaged place because of its topography, the place of migration waves, especially after the Balkan Wars, the place of poors and migrants. It was settled by the migrants from Greece, then Central Anatolia, later Kurdish community from Mardin at southeast of Turkey. Parallel to this social phenomenon, it is also a castle from the Alexander the Great period. Different than Ephesus, the neighborhood is alive. Here you see an image from the opening reception of the festival before the play. Among the festival participants, their memory of Kadifekale was more about, here you see the performance of Genç Arkal in Nazma Arman. So they remember the conflict between the state and Kurdish community. They remember shanty house before the urban transformation, the gaze of neighborhood people towards them, reminding them of social class differences, the police corridor, cages, uncomfortable and embarrassing feelings, and finally, contradiction between the content of the play and exclusion of the festival. Oh. Sorry. My second case study is Ayavukla, officially named St. Foucault's Church Culture Center. It's a cultural center transformed from the ruins of Orthodox Church. Similar to Kadifekale, the neighborhood becomes important. Therefore, I will start to analyze first the neighborhood, then the historical building. Basmani neighborhood, here you see the train station and also the crossroad with the mosque and the modern buildings. It's a junction of diverse ethno-religious communities. Sorry. It's a network of transport from camels to trains and buses. So somehow there is a continuity of this business center, right? It has been, or it used to be, both residential and business neighborhood. It's also the place of the first industry. It says approximately to Kemeraltı and Old Harbor. It means it's a junction of the trade. And it used to be the place where low and upper classes lived together. After the waves of migration, the upper class locals moved to newer neighborhoods. The population mobility still doesn't stop. It is considered as the entrance of Izmir because historically it was the neighborhoods where the migrants arrived by train and settled. Here you see an image of the church before the renovation in 2010. After the population exchange, the church was assigned to become an archaeological museum. Here, it's not very legible, but it's carved Arkeoloji Müzesi, which means Archaeology Museum at the side entrance of the building. Under the populist ideology of 50s, the Archaeological Museum was moved to Culture Park and the church was gradually abandoned. It became first the warehouse and rehearsal hall of State Opera and Ballet, then a ruin because of a fire, and lastly, culture center with investment of the municipality. So here you see the location, the surrounding than the building itself after the renovation. If I share the memory of Ayavukla among my festival participants, the interlocutors, there was first a French quartet sponsored by the French Institute in 2011 and German quartet sponsored by Goethe Institute in 2012. Most of the participants remembered that it was too hot for a concert. There was old neighborhood feeling. A participant's friend was thirsty and served water by an old neighbor. There was embarrassment between festival mood, elegance, and daily life, casuality. There was visibility of social class difference. Some had the feeling of unsafe and eerie due to Basmani perception in the collective memory. Few of them had contemplation about the place's past and created imaginative memory about the church's community. Different than Kadifekale and Ayavukla cases, Reji, as you see in the picture, the old monopoly cigarette factory, as it's called also tekel by the modern people, is quite isolated from its neighborhoods. Although it is located very close to popular neighborhood Alsancak train station and the avenue connecting the harbor historical center and north of the city with the east, the huge complex of the factory remains silent and invisible yet. Here you see the entrance of the factory going wild. There is no connection with the surrounding. It is disconnected by the traffic, wild plantation, and fences. Here you see a historical image that I downloaded from Facebook with the history groups of Izmir. It represents the industrial past. After the foundation of the Republic, it was transferred from European Regie company to the state. At the end of 90s, it was closed down because of the privatizations. So here you see the entrance with the initials of the tekel, İnhisarlar Tütün Fabrikası. The leaves of tobacco remains the dominant tobacco sector in the region, so it's kind of important for graphic design as well. Here you see a view of the factory from top above. In the past, recent past, there has been some projects, but they were stuck in the bureaucracy, the SIT, Protection Commission. It means it protects, at the same time, it let it ruin. So if I share the memory of the regie among the participants, there was 1 month event, they remember. There was chamber orchestra at the garden, an interactive video installation in the factory. Many spectators enjoyed with the children to learn how to play in a symphony. There was a simulation of becoming maestro. Some felt too hot and lack of air conditioning. The smell of tobacco burned the throat and meditated about the work conditions. The organizers, who involved much more with the evacuation of the factory and installation, were affected. One felt as if she entered a corridor to the parallel universe, Island of Time by Jan Assmann. She felt melancholy because of the ruination and place attachment of the old workers. Many people felt eerie and unsafe in the ruined building at night. The festival organization struggled in forming one despite its central and easy access location. There was insufficient collaboration with the schools and conservatorium. Both festival and the factory are isolated. My last but not least case study is Abajolin. This one is distinguished from the others because it is rather more advantageous location. It was renovated and still used in daily life by locals and tourists coming by the cruises. Kemeraltı neighborhood is known as a traditional market neighborhood, daily human crowd at daytime, but it's empty at night. Historically known as important stop for the Silk Road, it is junction between Asia and Europe. It's the place of co-living of Jewish, Muslim, and Armenian craftsmen and shopkeepers. It's the heart of esnaf culture, continuity, and trade customs. But it's devalued after the opening of shopping malls in this outskirts of the city, and it has a visual chaos by the crowd and bad graphic design application on the surface. Here you see in the interior of the inn before the intervention of the festival. If I share the memory of Abajol Inn, first festival, then my questions about Kemeraltı and Abajol Inn made nostalgia effect among the participants. They shared their memories of shopping and leisure time in their childhood and youth. And they also remembered, or let's say about bad memories about security after 90s. There was stiffness in 90s till the intervention of the municipality and Tarkem company. Kemeraltı has had also negative connotations as Jordan markets, referring to the visibility of Islamic dressing of the newer shoppers and traders. This indicates in my community old-style secular and modernist reaction to the Middle East affiliation to the place and the new population. Both the festival organizers and shopkeepers of the inn shared their view of image creation of the city branding of Izmir, but there has been a conflict between them. The shopkeepers saw the festival as a mediator of the municipality, and they expected more maintenance and advertisement of the inn. The concert setup was tense. The shopkeepers distrusted and felt unease. The temporary transformation of the courtyard was not fitting to their daily life routine. There was different views on open air events. One side there was organization which saw it as baroque theme. On the other side, the shopkeepers saw it as an opportunity to sell beer, record, and meze during the concert. And lastly, there was this eerie feeling due to the emptiness of Kemeraltı at night. As a conclusion, I can say that the temporary intervention of the festival in these particular spaces tickles the urban memory and renders visible the ruptures in the history of the city. The heterotopian space created by the festival makes people suspend their daily life use of the city, suspend time space, and make them contemplate about the past and present of the city. Some participants have nostalgic memories. The place creates positive memories about the past. Some participants are confronted with the social class differences. Some were disturbed by these eruptions of the past. The festival has good intentions, we can say, to create a prestigious image for Izmir, which is still necessary to compete with other cities. Although it has often budget problems, it aims to create an event of high quality art in Izmir, which is already challenging. At the same time, the festival also explicitly aims to present the complex past of this historical sites to a wider audience. But this creates a huge paradox. I mean, one hand, it opens a door, but it's really superficial. First, the festival remains elitist. It's a harvest, a conclusion of Turkish modernity, and it seems not to know how to deal with the past. Second, in some cases, the heterotopian space erupts in the conditions of the festival, and the invisible is made visible. But the ephemeral structure of the festival only has a temporary effect. People easily forget their encounter of these historical places when they return home. Besides, the lack of repetition prevents the festival to become a sustainable part of urban memory. Also, the social segregation in the city becomes more visible with the exclusive approach of the festival. Apart from ticket prices, the festival doesn't offer an event to include lower class neighborhood people. Instead, it hands off those neighborhoods, thinking that it made a mistake, and remains mostly an Adnan Saygul Art Center and Ephesus Antique site. I hope that my PhD research inspires the organizers of the International Izmir Festival to acknowledge this paradox and to think further along the opportunities that these historical places offer to an art festival. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hasan, for your presentation. So now we go to the next step, which is the interrogation by the jury. I will briefly present you the members of the doctoral jury. We have as supervisors Professor Christel Stalpaert and Professor Rozita Dimova. Then we have as members that do the interrogation, Professor Lisa Dikomitis, Professor Fulia Baskaya, Professor Sophie de Smet, and Professor Francis Maas. And then we have as members of the study program at Ghent University, we have Professor Bram van Oostveld and Professor Annelies van Asse, and that's it, yes. So we interrogation by the jury members that read in great detail this doctoral dissertation. And we start with colleague Lisa Dikomitis. And may I ask you, Professor Dikomitis, to introduce yourself briefly before you start this oral examination? Thank you.
Okay, good morning. So I'm a professor of anthropology at Kiel University in the UK. And it was a pleasure to read your dissertation, Hasan.
Thank you.
So I'll first say a little bit about the dissertation and then I have two questions, okay? So your doctoral dissertation, as you explained to us very nicely, is based on your research conducted over 1 decade, a period of 10 years, underpinned by a lot of fieldwork in Izmir, of which the main bulk was conducted in 2013. Your dissertation is rich in ethnographic data, and the energy and enthusiasm of you as a researcher is really tangible on each page. I really loved to read your dissertation. In this COVID times, it was really nice to be transported again to my beloved corner of the world. I say this as a Cypriot, of course. You employed an ethnographic approach, as you explained already. And you are from Izmir, and you appropriately reflected on your native position. You were thoughtful of the dynamic relationships between yourself and your interlocutors, and also of the changes in Izmir's urban landscape during the course of that decade. Writing from different disciplines for different disciplines is not an easy feat, but you do this with flying colors. What I particularly liked about your dissertation is that it speaks to different disciplinary audiences. You write with an academic flair, and there is a good balance between discipline-specific terminology and a language that is accessible to an interdisciplinary readership: art sciences, social research, history, anthropology. Precisely because you use the clear, concise language, your thesis will appeal both to the academic reader, but certainly and importantly, to readers outside of universities. For instance, people in Izmir, people in the cultural sector, people in the heritage sector. In summary, it was a real pleasure to read and assess your doctoral thesis, which I rate as very good. But perfection is not from this world. Well, that is why I already offered you some critical questions when we first discussed your dissertation. Not necessarily to improve your current research, but perhaps to think when you publish about this dissertation and when you continue doing research. So I told you I have two questions. Yes. And the first question is, and you explained a little bit already in your PowerPoint, so you don't have to repeat what you've already said, but we have such a, I'm sure, wide audience here on the call. And I would like you to talk a little bit about how, in practical terms, what does that actually mean in Izmir in 2013, 2014, 2016, for Hasan to conduct ethnography, to do participant observation? Can you tell me in your own words, what does that mean, in fact? Can you tell a bit about that? Over.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Dikomitis. Well, first of all, I can say that this question is really valuable for me. And I can say that I'm not only a researcher, but also a native person. So this 10 years has been, I will also refer from Ghent, not studying in the village, but studying in the village. So it means it was really important to be there, to observe myself, to observe the community members, the festival participants, how they react, how they remember, what they remember, also how does they change under this urban transformation and Turkish modernity.
Oh, okay, thank you, Hasan. And then my second question, you just said it already a bit, you're a native person. Could you give the audience maybe one or two very concrete examples when your kind of personal identity, Hasan, who's from Izmir, and your professional identity, Hasan, the researcher who's interested in particular things, when they came together, or maybe when they clashed, when there were challenges? So two concrete examples to make this, a bit clear to our audience. What does that mean? Okay, over.
Thank you very much. For the audience who are interested into ethnographic methods, I know some. I think it's a really important question. Thank you. So when you make ethnography, especially as a native person, you have to take care of your emotions, your own reactions and reflections. It means that somehow in the text, or it could be also a graphic novel with the comics, you have to reflect yourself as transparent. Also, you play the camera towards your audience to play between this Hasan the native, Hasan the researcher, and Hasan the young man, local man. So I can say that it's a process of intersubjective dialogue between myself and my community, my research group.
Okay, thank you. Professor Leman, I'm finished. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, colleague Dikomitis. Then I pass the word to Professor Fulya Baskaya.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Fulya Baskaya, and I am a professor in the Visual Communication Design Department at Yaşar University in Izmir. And I know Hasan personally, and I was lucky enough to kind of participate in his 10 years of amazing effort and dedication, which I really appreciate. I was really quite surprised by your motivation, enthusiasm, Hasan, even in the most desperate moments of ups and downs, which exist in most of the PhD studies writing process. So it was really a pleasure for me to read your thesis, which was written in a positively unconventional manner, in format, I mean. I think it is a well-written interdisciplinary thesis overall. And knowing that you have a graphic design background, I also admire and appreciate a lot your courageous and successful attempt of dwelling in new and deep fields of studies such as anthropology, ethnographic research, and memory studies. Mm-hmm. So I congratulate you deeply for this work, and I wish you will continue with the same enthusiasm and dedication in your future academic pursuits.
Thank you.
So I have also two questions. My first question is, what do you think is the contribution of your thesis to the current literature on the city of Izmir? Or maybe just how this thesis will add to our perception of the city of Izmir.
Thank you for your valuable question. I can say that already coming from applied arts, graphic designers study material culture. I mean, you study photography, the philosophy of photography. But what we also discussed previously, while anthropologists, sociologists talk about or research about the products, the city, they may not have this, let's say, creative view of the designer, whereas the designers might be really colorful, might be really energetic, kind of their ideas, but still they might be superficial because of this lack of social context. I can say that although I took a big challenge, kind of Don Quixote way, to jump from graphic design to ethnographic methods and studying Izmir within memory studies, it's important for designers, I mean, not only graphic designers, but also architects, urban planners, industrial designers, to think about the social context, because also in our courses, we foster our students to think about the resonation of our designs towards the public, towards the spectators, towards individuals.
Thank you. My second question is a little bit more personal. Mm-hmm. Maybe people in the audience will be curious how this 10 years of process of research, interaction, analysis, and writing influenced you as Hasan Işıklı in terms of your own relationship to the city of Izmir.
Well, thank you for this question. In 2010, I can say that I was like a ship of Arcas company. She was coming with the containers, disembarking and then departing. I had always this idea of living and then having this adventure side. Okay, I will go there, I will do that. But the research, I mean, this painstaking, hardworking process made me more mature, I can say. I learned to be much more focused on my research. I learned to be much more careful to listen to observe the other, because I think this is kind of the shortcoming of studying graphic design. You focus so much the representation, the image, that we sometimes neglect what the other people think, how they perceive. So it was almost luxury for me to have this process to be, let's say, more wise person.
Thank you very well. Thanks a lot. That's all for me. Thank you very much. I will leave the word to Professor Leman. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I pass the word to Professor Sophie de Smet.
Good morning, Hasan.
Hello, Sophie. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Yeah, me too. I mean, COVID, huh?
Hasan, as a former colleague, as a colleague of our department and of our research group SPAM, Studies in Performing Arts, and I'm really honored also to be a member of your jury. And I treasure our discussions both as a PhD student in Ghent while you were here in Ghent. So I'm very happy to be part of the committee, and I congratulate you with your PhD research in the art studies, and your personal engagement and consistency in conducting ethnographical research for over 10 years is really admirable. And it could be an inspiration for many other students in the field of performance studies, but also to engage with different disciplines and broadening our perspectives or methodological stances in the field of the arts, in the search actually to answer our research questions, because your study really finds itself on the crossroads between anthropology, memory studies, and performance studies. And you realize through a long-term ethnographical research that covers multiple years, you really realize a reflection on the awareness of place in the particular context of Izmir, combining different disciplinary perspectives. And this is also, of course, a beautiful reflection of your personal background, your personality, but also as a researcher and as a student. What distinguishes your study is a critical stance towards potential neglected memory spaces in the city of Izmir, and also its emphasis on the relational aspects of assessing these particular moments of contemplation within monuments and buildings by the arts. And here you focus on the voices of your participants and on the people that visit the festival, and you highly value their stories and their knowledge and experience, and that is something that I really liked reading in your thesis. So you gathered so much material from your personal reflections, your diary notes, in-depth interviews, participant observation from an insider perspective. So what I of course also appreciate is your honesty and transparency, and you also acknowledge your limitations and your point of view as at the same time as an insider, and you're really creating a critical stance towards your own subjectivity. So beyond my appreciation of the work, I also have some reflection or some questions that I would like to share today, also with the broader audience. So first of all, you referred in your thesis to social ruptures and to the concept of cultural trauma. And I would really like to hear you talk a bit more about your definition of trauma, your personal definition, how perhaps this definition evolved while reading literature, while engaging with participants and listening to their stories. So how did you engage with the concept, introduce the concept in your field work?
Thank you very much, Sophie. Well, first of all, I want to thank you to engage with South African group, because it also gave me awareness about what performing arts could do. You know, I studied graphic design, so I didn't know that performing arts could study memories and also traumas. So my observation among you, also, I also read the article of Mark Fleshman, the Cage, was really useful. So thank you. I can say, I mean, I will not continue with Mark Fleshman because it's another context with the similarities, but I can say after many observations of my research group and my readings, trauma is a rupture. So for example, in the Ottoman cities like Thessaloniki and Izmir, we see this rupture. So there is a policy which makes rupture between past and present, and always this modern, or this, let's say, the power tries to comes over to the previous one. So it's kind of designer approach. But in the aspect of art studies, if I make it broader, I can say that it's a rupture in psychological, social, and physical way. For example, in Izmir context, the big fire of Smyrna, it was a trauma, but I say that cultural trauma because this trauma belonged to the people who were affected by the fire, and those people are dead, or they were really, let's say correctly, they were forced to immigrate from Izmir. So they have still the traumas of this big fire of Smyrna, but not in Izmir. This trauma now is spread over the world, in Australia, in Greece, and in Marseille, where there is a Greek community, also Armenian community. Then I can say that social rupture, because as a human, we make sense of the space through the social construction. And as we are detached from the space, like the population exchange case, we have a memory of Izmir, we have a memory of Smyrna, but through the years, through the decades, is disconnected from the being and presence. Maybe I can also formulate this way for the audience. Collective trauma is a word that might indicate that everyone is involved. For example, Yeşilçam cinema, you don't know it's Belgian, but it's an old Turkish cinema, which is really popular, and it belongs to collective memory. We make the same meaning. But a cultural memory trauma leaves more room for diversity. So in that sense, how people remember about that period, traumatic period, is also important. Especially in the context of Izmir, with the several migration waves, the diversity in the cultural traumas is more at stake. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hasan. Then I have one last reflection. Therefore, I would like to invite you a bit to reflect perhaps on the tension between the individual and the collective in your thesis. In the sense that in your thesis, you're reflecting on individual experiences of your participants within also collectively experienced performance on collective memories. So performances or the festival performances, it creates a collectively experienced moment of retrospection in historical sites. However, collectively, and perhaps also in silence, and you engaged in-depth interviews, you engaged with narrations verbally with individuals. So I was wondering, how do you see this balance between individual and collective, and how perhaps did your dissertation and your interviews and your listening towards individual voices, how did it contribute actually in creating memories or creating collective memories, and contributed actually in a sense to the festival in creating some memories more explicit?
Thank you for this valuable question. So we can say, first of all, that, I mean, we have also Francis Myers in our group. Organizing an arts festival is really challenging. You have to take care of the program, you have to take care of the budget, all the permissions. And when you make it, it's like a, beautiful dinner, or let's say like a celebration. So it's a collective event, but different than the history of performing arts. It's not a ritual. I mean, in one sense, it is a ritual because it repeats every year, but it's not really a ritual because it's much more dynamic. In the bracket, it's much more modern. So it is not really strict traditions. The difference of art festivals than, for example, praying, going to church, celebrating Easter, it's something really individual. It's also became really obvious during my interviews, because when I started my research, I had this stereotype of Izmir and perception, because as I said, the graphic design, I had the motivation to capture the image, and I really want to have one image, one color. But in fact, the teacher side of ethnography was that. I mean, I saw how the narrations, perceptions were diverse. For example, in Regie, in the cigarette factory, the melancholy of Ceren affected me deeply because she felt empathy with the old workers, and also the materiality of the factory affected her deeply. She really connected the building as if it was a kind of old relative that she didn't see for a long time. And for example, in the case of Kadifekale, I remember, for example, one participant said, "Oh, it was marvelous. I enjoyed the panoramic view of Izmir. There was a fresh air I enjoyed." But some others were really embarrassed by this cages and police corridor, the social segregation. And the organizers in the beginning of fieldwork, they made silencing of this process. And when I remembered them, I said, spectators told this, say that. They said, okay, yeah, it was, but it happened once. So yeah, it was really a case. So I can say, as a person who studied art festival, yes, this richness of art festival is to have this diversity of voices. And as a designer, you can combine, you can make a composition, and there might be harmony, and also there might be contradiction, which is also, let's say, the power of art festival, which opens door for democratic, because in some countries, in some countries, there is no voice for the diversity. Thank you. Yeah, I will add to my contribution. So as I said, the festival has ephemeral approach to those urban places. And after the interventions, people forget about the event and the memories or the contemplation process. So my presence, as well as the research itself, triggered like the festival itself. It was a kind of act of memory to make people remember the intervention of the festival and their moment of contemplation about the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Hasan. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I pass the word to Professor Francis Maas.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Dear Hasan.
Yes.
It's with much interest and joy that I've read your dissertation. And I can assure you that it was a slow read. It needed some memorizing, all those names of places, of people, all those historical events you refer to. At first sight, it seemed to be somewhat repetitious, going over the same issues again and again. However, at the end, the way you present your material turned out to be exactly right. It gives the reader the opportunity to immerse himself fully in the rich ethnographical and historical context you are able to draw with such precision and liveliness. It gave the impression of really having been there in those fascinating places you described, in all their richness of atmosphere, human encounters, and sense of history. Your dissertation is a convincing exercise in what we could now term the anthropological turn in art studies. This means that the field is studied as a complex phenomenon of human interaction. Art is taken out of the transcendental aesthetic realm in which it had been enshrined since the formulation of aesthetic values in idealist philosophy. But at this point in history, I wonder whether we have not come at a point where we have gone too far in the opposite direction. This thought implies no criticism of the text that you have presented. Mm-hmm. I have learned very much from it, and I'm grateful for all the information. Mm-hmm. However, I would like to go somewhat further in the discussion and investigate whether a more artistic approach to the functioning and policies of the Izmir Festival could add something to your ethnographic research. After all, we are granting you a degree in art studies. Ethnography has a place in it, an important one, but does not answer the fundamental questions about artistic identities alone. So approach your analysis of the Izmir Festival also from a particular perspective. I have experience as a former festival director myself, and with this background, I recognize many of the problems and challenges the Izmir Festival seems to face. Now I raise a few issues on which you can respond freely. So it appears from your text that the Izmir Festival faces a problem of perception. It extends for over a rather long period of time and is active in a wide area. The result is that, as you write, some participants do not always be aware that the concert they are attending is a production of the festival. It sounds familiar to me, but in my experience, this challenge can only be met by concentration in time and space and by sharp profiling of artistic content. In our country, the evolution towards artistic events that are more focused in their aims and strategies has been stimulated by the implementation of the arts decree. Before that instrument of government policy was installed, the landscape of artistic events in our country looked quite similar to the actual situation of the Izmir Festival as you describe it. So my question would be, what about the arts policies of the Turkish authorities? Is there a central vision on artistic profiling and identity? Your text does not give very much information on that. One gets the impression that funding from local or national authorities happens on a more ad hoc basis than in a sustained kind of policy. Could you comment on that?
Thank you, Professor Mais, for your remarkable question. I can say that Turkish state gives permission, for example, to have concerts, classical music concerts in Efes Amphitheater, which is already delicate. The renovation still continues. And some sites is still not so penetrable, which makes also the festival very original, because in daily life, you cannot enter those historical sites, but thanks to the festival, you can visit and you see and you experience the places, which has been also my inspiration. I didn't study the artistic program because of my motivation and my background. But I can say that through this volunteer job and also observation, the Izmir Festival takes lots of challenges. For example, it tries to give it also diversity in its program. So basically it's a classical music program, festival, but also there is at least one ballet, one contemporary dance, and one world music, which tries to also access to different audiences. But as I focus on the social contexts, I realized that this social class differences, the ticket pricing were also very important. So I gave it room. So what could be comparing with, for example, the festivals in Belgium? The festival could have much more considering the neighborhood concepts, like stay in one neighborhood 1 year or 10 years, to invest there, to have much more contact with the people, and then to have much more interactive events, and then to really embrace them, and then to have their connections and to have their support. But now I see that Izmir Festival really depends on the, let's say, local and national sponsors, which makes it very vulnerable, because once there is no sponsorship, there is no budget, and they really freaked out. And I think, which also becomes visible in my thesis in the conclusion, you have to have this support of the local people. Was it? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, to continue on that, you raised the question whether initiatives like you describe could serve a broader goal of integrating new audiences into the orbit of high culture and of reaching out to neglected communities. And I understand from your text that the implementation of a cultural function in the church of Ayavukla has had some effect in the long term, and that it continued as a site of cultural exchange after the festival productions. But for the other venues, is this also the case, or did the investment come to a stop? Again, from my experience, I realized that integrating new audiences, reaching out to neglected societal groups or crossing sociological boundaries only happens when you really want it. It needs an investment of the longue durée. And I also realized that the organization of high-profile artistic events, like bringing over the Berlin Philharmonic or the Tokyo Ballet, is not the greatest challenge. Those events pay for themselves, no matter how costly they may seem. But small-scale initiatives demand real investment and sharp financial choices. Could you please clarify how the policy of the Izmir Festival is dealing with that?
Well, thank you for this question, which also became visible during the case study Regie, the cigarette factory. I was shocked by the awareness that the festival is not connected with the conservatorium and performing arts departments of Izmir University. So I mean, at least in Hasan and some other festivals that I observed, there is organic connection between the conservatorium and performing arts studies with the art festival. So many students become the volunteers, later they become junior artists. So they become part of this cluster. But in Izmir Festival, for the sake of prestige and high quality, there's exclusion of the young students of arts, also young public. So which is really problematic from my side. And secondly, I can say that long durée, I agree. And well, I forgot. Oh, yeah, I forgot.
So it's about the Ayavukla that continues as a cultural site.
Yes, thank you. So concerning Ayavukla, yes, there is a continuity of art performances. I mean, it's not really dance like Beaux-Arts in Brussels, for example, but it happens at least once per month. It's something. But the problem from my perspective, when you try to make city branding, you have to engage with the memory of the city, memory of the building. So when you neglect or when you see the building like an empty shell, you have this beauty and aesthetic, but as long as there is no memory, it's like a something without separate, then there is no connection and there is no depthness. Therefore, the festival also fails in this attempt of having prestige as well as the Izmir municipality. Thank you.
Okay. And then just a final remark about classical music, because that's my business. I understand your business is graphic design, but I'm a music scholar. So just to clarify a point, the status of classical music in Turkey in the Izmir Festival, you describe it as related to this sense of Europeanized lifestyle, yes, which is part of the identity of the upper and upper middle classes. Yes. And also you mentioned in your personal experience that it's about the question about your identity. Yes, well, what is part of me is Europeanized and what not, and so on. Could you please comment a bit more on that? Because I have the impression that classical music at the world stage now, especially in countries like Japan or China, is becoming less and less detached from this Europeanized ideal and is becoming, in a sense, part of global culture. My view on that is partial, and so I'm not going to make heavy statements. But please comment on the situation in Turkey, because it leaves many questions open for me.
Well, thank you for these important questions. I wish I said we are in harmony with classical music world, like Central Asian countries, that we have linguistic similarities. But in the 10 years of my research, I realized that there has been this polarization of cultural policy in the nation, in the country, also in the local level. So people became kind of anti-Western, anti-elite, anti-education, which also resonated in the consumption of classical music. So there was already this stereotype of classical music belonging to upper classes and rich people and elitism because of the consequence of Turkish modernity, the clash between urban and rural. So I can say, it could be possible to, to much more democratize classical music, but Turkish state and also Izmir Festival haven't really invested on this. And unfortunately, yeah, the example of China and Japan is good because I also listen in YouTube the examples. Superficially, they invest, they say that we are here, but I think this approach is much more like participating to Eurovision competition. It means that we are also powerful, we have also good image, we're also high class. But behind that, unfortunately, and you may also interview the musicians from Turkey, there is not really support from the organizations And the audience also became, through the years, much more distant to this product, which is originated from Europe, unfortunately. And also, I can say popular culture contribute to this underestimating the classical music, because there is much more the nostalgia of Ottomanism, Ottoman period, which much more related with the Eastern classical music, let's say Byzantine music or Turkish art music. But which is interesting or contradictory one, the young population which has a nostalgia of Ottoman period don't listen to the Byzantine music, or let's say Eastern classical music. They listen to the rap music and some mixture of rap and arabesque music.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you, members of the jury, the reading committee. Now my question is if there is somebody from the examination, from the other members of the examination board wanting to ask a question. Okay, if not, then I would like to ask if somebody from the audience wants to ask a question to Hasan. Please raise your hand. You can do that. Wait a moment. If you have the knob reactions, if you press on that knob, you see raise hand, or maybe it's written in Turkish, I don't know, or in another language, raise hand, and then the hand appears. And if you don't find it, you can just start asking the question.
For the record, for the ones who have weak English, they may ask in Turkish. I can translate and answer in Turkish, then translate to English.
Yeah, okay. So don't hesitate, because this is your only opportunity to ask a question in public to Hasan. Okay. If
I think there is one person.
There's one question. There's one.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, okay.
Thank you for this interesting presentation, Hasan. It was very nice. Yeah, thank you. I have a question. You were saying in your conclusion that the festival doesn't know how to deal with the past. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, is that, could it be that because the past is complicated, that the festival doesn't know how to deal with the past? So I would like you to tell more about what you think, why the festival doesn't know how to deal with the past.
Thank you for this valuable question, Professor Yumlu. Well, yeah, it has many layers. I mean, this question has many layers. I will take my time. So first, we have this being a consequence of Turkish modernity, which is already based on being the newer, more technology, or let's say orientation to the new, to the future, and not seeing the neglection of the past. And secondly, unfortunately, the memory issue is not in the culture policy of Izmir Festival. So while they use or utilize the historical places, they think about the historicality and this connection with this city branding, but they don't care about the memories, which might be very traumatic, in fact. And therefore, some of the festival participants, like organizers or spectators, might be affected, because even though the festival is silence, or even though there is this forgetting period after the traumas, the material, the buildings has a power. For example, when you sit in a church which is renovated, you may, of course, you will think about the community which used to live there. You will say, oh, once upon a time, there was a Greek community living in Basmane. I mean, you're also Turkish living in Izmir. When we say Basmane, we think about the textile, we think electronic, prostitution, nightlife, the macho culture, this drugs dealing, but we don't think about this memory before the Republic period. So unintentionally, Izmir Festival tickles, or let's say peels off this traumatic period, but as it doesn't know how to deal with that in an artistic way, it just tries to covers up back and it says, okay, we made a kind of mistake, so now we don't go back to Ayabukla, and they stay in Adnan Saygun Art Center.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Another question? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Please ask your question, Muzaffar.
Could you please turn on the speaker? Yes.
I have two questions, rather maybe an affirmation. One is the budget is mainly dependent on the municipality and the governmental sponsorship. You have to maybe comment about it, because Professor Myers asked about it, and it's a very important factor. Without the support of the municipality, it was very difficult for the festival to go on. I think you should comment on it. And the second thing I would like to ask about is, how do you perceive the reflection of the past on the fest? How would it be possible? Can you give an indication about that? Because rather the festival uses the sites, the old town sites, Agora, Katifekare, etc. But how do you perceive the content should be to bring about the past? Because it's very difficult to do, especially with the culture. Plus, there were, if you remember, important activities in the neighborhoods too, in Cordon, etc. Especially there was a 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, the European Youth Orchestra gave a concert in Gündoğdu, in the middle of the city. So I think they try it, but as Professor Myers may know about it, it's very difficult to join these two operands in a festival. So how do you perceive that it will be possible to make this connection?
Thank you, Mr. Tunça, for your valuable questions. And first of all, thank you for emphasizing the budget case of the festival. Indeed, it is dependent to government and municipality. And my perception on reflection of the past to the festival, it is possible. There are many studies in my department showing that the content might be relevant with the memory of the place. And indeed, the actual municipality makes lots of activities in the old neighborhoods, like Izmir Tarih, and Tarkem does many activities to enhance. But those activities might be artistic, also might be not artistic. As I concern Izmir Festival, I just focused on close up to Izmir Festival. I'm glad that you mentioned the youth concert in Gündoğdu, and indeed festival sometimes organizes or gives space to young artists, but unfortunately it is not really sustainable. It needs to have much more repetition and much more, let's say, duration for the young population and young artists, I can say.
Okay, thank you for the questions and the answers. Okay. Other questions? The last question. Okay, if not, then I wish to thank the members of the jury that have read your thesis and for their valuable discussions and critical remarks on the thesis. So now the examination board will retreat to deliberate about the merit of the exam taken by Hasan. And I would suggest please stay online in this Zoom meeting. We go to another digital place, and then after a few minutes, perhaps we come back a few minutes or 5 minutes or a bit longer. We will be back very soon. Okay, so thank you very much, and we meet again in a couple of minutes. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. The jury is back from the deliberation. After deliberation about the merits of the exam taken by Hasan Işıklı to obtain the degree of Doctor of Art Science, the Doctoral Examination Board has decided that he has passed the exam. Therefore, Hasan is proclaimed Doctor of Art Science. Congratulations.
Bravo!
Hasan.
Bravo! Congratulations, Hasan.
Normally, I should give you the cap of the degree and also the diploma, but of course this is all digital now, and it doesn't happen that way. And you should sign the receipt of the diploma and so on. But this will all go on digitally. So the thing that will happen now is that the supervisors, Professor Stalpaert and Professor Rozita, but now I got my, sorry for that. Yes, so Rozita Dimova, sorry, they will give the laudatio. So I first pass the word to Christel Stalpaert.
Okay, dear Dr. Hasan Işıklı, it is with pleasure that I hold this laudatio on the occasion of the successful defense of your PhD. And as you know, when I give a laudatio, I always go back to the first moment that we met. And the very first time I saw your name was in an email by Rick Pinkston, Professor Emeritus Cultural Anthropology at Ghent University. Rick was about to retire and taking care for his researchers. As we know, Rick is a very caring person. He wrote me a mail stating that he wanted to hand over a very enthusiastic researcher of his called Hasan Işıklı. And he thought that I would be a good supervisor considering the topic, which was then the International Izmir Festival. So I accepted the offer, and together with Rick, who initially remained co-supervisor for the anthropological part, we met somewhere in 2012 at Rozita in Ghent, in Rick's office, and discussing the topic of your PhD. Now, I said, of course, Rick described you as a very enthusiastic researcher, and I think that was an underestimation because you were super enthusiastic. You had a drive to proceed.
I have a message here. Congratulations, Hasan. Thank you.
So you were super enthusiastic. You had a drive to proceed, which was amazing. And every bit of theoretical advice that we gave was for you a reason to dig into that literature, to read and to absorb everything which was in that literature. And that hunger for knowledge that very enthusiastic hunger for knowledge is very valuable, but it also has its risk. So my task as a supervisor, first and foremost, consisted of putting limits to the interdisciplinary field that you wanted to expand continuously. And Rick and I often had to remind you of an imagery that we used a lot, the imagery of the bridge. Like, look, Hasan, you can conduct interdisciplinary research, but you don't have to cross the bridge. If you are on top of the bridge and you supervise everything, that's a more comfortable position. So keeping that overview within the process of research sometimes was a struggle, but you managed. And I'm extremely proud of you today. Someone who was very important in helping you to keep that overview was my dear colleague, Professor Rozita Dimova. In the course of the research project, she took over the co-promotership for the ethnographic methodology from Rick, and I would really like to thank her for this because she did a wonderful job. So thank you, Rozita, for your patience, your expertise, and a very valuable collaboration in this research project. And thank you also the members of the Doctoral Guidance Committee for their support and also their expertise in this research process. I just mentioned 2012, so it was a long process. It was an intense process, and it wasn't always easy for you. As a scholar coming from Izmir, you also experienced what you described in your presentation, a dislocation, a sense of dislocation in your emplacement process in Belgium. Okay, you were not forced to settle here, you were not forced to settle somewhere else, but creating a new home in a foreign country always involves emotional collisions. And I hope that our research center, SPAM, and the researchers in it have provided a warm nest for you. And I'm sure that they experienced you as a very warm, friendly, and kind person. Annelies and Sophie are here, they are part of SPAM, and I'm sure they agree with me that you are such a warm, friendly, and nice person. But especially when you had to move from Belgium back to Turkey because of personal reasons, that was not an easy relocation. Hasan, I think you are not only being very enthusiastic, but also very courageous. And I truly admire you for that. You are very resilient, and we should keep in mind that traveling in between universities, dealing with different research climates, but also dealing with practical things such as accommodation, etc., is an extra burden to carry amongst all the administrative things to tackle. Let's not forget too that you managed to finish this research while teaching part-time at Yassar University in the Visual Communication Design Department, which is wonderful. You did it. So an extra congratulations for the devotion with which you wrote research proposals, presented papers, wrote articles, and you did a lot. You participated while teaching and while doing the research. You participated in conferences in Skopje, in Cork, Ireland, in Gdansk, Poland, in Komotny, in Greece, in the context of art and memory studies. You also participated in conferences in Lisbon, Portugal, and Athens in Greece in the context of urban memory and cultural policy. So congratulations, because you have been very productive. And I think the Visual Communication Design Department is very lucky to have you in their team. I wish you all the luck in all your future endeavors. Dr. Hasan Işıklı, good luck. Take care, be brave, stay safe. Thank you for the collaboration. And I now give the floor to my dear colleague, Rozita Dimova.
Thank you, Christel, for this wonderful laudatio, you know, for the wonderful words, for accepting me to join you in this process of co-supervising Hasan. And thank you, Hasan, for working with me, for putting up with my sometimes, you know, almost unbearable aggressive presence. We had our moments, you know, we really had, but I hope I managed to, you know, convey to you the importance of ethnography and of doing field work, how important and necessary it is. But also, you know, I insisted on that element of self-reflexivity, to give it to you in terms of critical approach to your study, to push things even further. I know sometimes that wasn't easy, And I remember, as Christel said, going back to our initial, moments, I was actually a member of the first committee when, that was assembled, the first examination jury, when that was in 2015, I think. And I remember afterwards when you came to my office and when you said, okay, I need to do a really serious ethnographic research. And you said, I'm no longer a graphic designer, now I'm an anthropologist. And I said, well, but how do you shift between these labels like this? Now I'm this, now I'm that. But you said so honestly and sincerely, well, if I'm not a graphic designer and you say I'm not an anthropologist, then what am I? And I said, but you can embrace and embody many different, positions in terms of your approach towards the topic in your professionalism. It wasn't easy for you. You are a guy who needs a very stable ground. You need a label to hold on, which is completely counterintuitive to what anthropology does. We need slippery grounds, fluid, possibilities in which we bypass boundaries. And as Christel said, being on the top of a bridge and overlooking things is much more advantageous than just crossing over and holding on to fixed identities. But, I insisted on this being open to different, interpretations, different approaches. And in the pre-defense, Lisa so rightly asked, why are you missing new stuff, new literature? Well, because we went from the beginning and you indulge in these early studies of anthropology so deeply. That was such an in-depth approach that there was no time to cover more contemporary stuff, which would have been relevant. But I realized that there was also a structural problem to this. In Ghent, there were no courses in anthropology. There is no an anthropology department that would have offered you a proper formal training in anthropological theory, in ethnographic methods. So I think you really surpassed your own abilities to do this with directed readings and individual tutorials with me and with Christel and with Rick earlier. So in that respect, with all the structural obstacles and impasses, you did a fantastic job. But then I also, as much as I tried, as I said, to convey the anthropological, ethnographic knowledge and a path to you, I've learned so much from you. You are not even aware of that, that you've been my mirror in terms of, what the thesis was all about, awareness of place. You actually connected me to Izmir to an extent that, as I said, you're not aware. To the extent that I actually made a trip to Izmir when I was in Istanbul. I decided to go to Izmir and visit all these 4 sites that were so described in detail, but still I just felt that I needed to see them with my own eyes. So I spent this week in Izmir with you, going to all these 4 sites and understanding your decisions and choices and arguments in the thesis. That was so important for me, especially when we went to Kadif Kale, when we met this refugee woman, the Kurdish woman, Khatija, where spent almost 2 hours talking to her. Actually, I was talking to her, you were translating. And then I realized that maybe, your decision, deliberate choice to eliminate the locals, we discussed this with Lisa last time, but your choice to eliminate the locals was maybe appropriate one, because I realized then that the way you connected to these refugees and people who have been in the margins in Izmir was not an easy task. You didn't, you had a problem in this social gap between people. So focusing on the festival participants who are upper class, who are more closer to who you are, was actually a strategic choice. For me as an anthropologist, for me, it's about, the marginalized and kind of those who are in the neglected ones. But I realized then, on Kadif Kale, when we in that spot, when we talked to the Kurdish woman, that you were actually wise in making this choice, because if you would have interviewed locals in Basmane or in the refugee communities around Kadif Kale, that would have been maybe an impossible stretch for you. You might not have been able to digest and pack that. So again, I learned so much from that visit, especially Izmir. I mean, I've been to Izmir previously, just briefly on my way to Ayvalık, but I've never really managed to comprehend and to understand the city as I did through your thesis, that now remains one of the, you know, highlights in my own landscape and my own memoryscape of cities in Southeastern Europe, in the Balkans, you know, that I love. So you actually discovered Izmir's kind of essence through your dissertation, to the extent that I'm really grateful for that. And in that respect, I, you know, really think that there is a bright future ahead with your now multiple professional identity, being graphic designer. Somehow you managed to reclaim that identity again, you know, being graphic designer, being knowledgeable of ethnography and anthropological methods. So I think there is a lot ahead that you can do in terms of applied work as a culture management, teaching, research. So I, you know, just wish you all the best. As Christel said, you're courageous, you're wonderful, and I hope, you know, all the best will happen for you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, for me, Dr. Hasan.
Thank you. Professor, your voice is turned off. Yeah.
So, thank you, Professor Dimova, for the laudatio, and also Professor Stalpaert for the laudatio and the supervision of this thesis. So by this, I formally close the meeting of the doctoral dissertation. But I don't leave before, of course, also saying goodbye to Dr. Hasan. I think it's a good title. It sounds great. Dr. Hasan is, so from now on, you will pass your life this way with this title. Thank you very much for your presentation. I regret that we don't have a reception. That would be the normal thing to do, to have a reception, but I guess Ghent University will organize one big reception with all the doctoral, with all the doctors and people that ever attended such meetings. It would be huge, I think, after the Corona times. Hopefully we can do this. And so congratulations once more. And okay, this formally, and the session is closed, but maybe Hasan, you want to say something before we leave this digital platform?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. I didn't prepare a text, but I would love to thank especially to my supervisors, Christel, Stalpaert, and Rozita Dimova, because even though I'm kind of colorful, shiny, and enthusiastic person, I had the time that I was a bitchy, because I had this anxiety about the future, anxiety of finance, anxiety of this proceeding with the research, because through the process of research, I realized that I took too much challenge. It was overwhelming for me as a person who studied graphic design. So I want to play Don Quixote, and I failed in the first phase in 2015. And later it was a second phase, like a theater. But in fact, it was under my hand to transform it to tragedy or to a comedy. So I said, it won't become a tragedy, it will be a comedy. So maybe, as Francis Myers mentioned, this self-reflexivity and this transparency became a part of what I forgot the anthropologist's name, became this part of my research and my own evolution. So I was there as a researcher, and I was there as a Hasan who discovers, who grows this awareness of the place, about himself, the city. So I was a kind of the city romantic who was wandering himself and the city and many identities. And I want to thank to exam committee as well, to Professor Dimova, also Christel, to give me many links and many references to read, because I didn't have any connections. So all this network provided me to have larger vision about art festivals, city making, memories, and so on. And of course, I remember that in 2014, there was a course of memory and traumas organized by history department. They were really ambitious researchers, and I felt really underestimated. But I think it was also a part of process. So in each failure, I gained a new layer, a new understanding, which made me stronger, in fact. So I want to thank you for everybody from the beginning till the end. Also to Peter to resolve all this technical problem that I did. Also to Sophie, to Annelies, to Marieke, to Laura, who is not now in the Netherlands. So it has been a long path, long voyage, and now I'm here. So thank you.
Okay, congratulations again.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye, Hasan. Good
Goodbye,
luck.
Rozita. Goodbye, Christel.